Hi, it's Tamara Williams here with Tamara Williams and Company and the famous.
I'm Emily Kennedy with Stockman Bank.
And today we're going to talk about what interest rates are doing and stagflation, something I know absolutely nothing about. And Emily is going to kind of take it away here. She's going to educate us. If you have any questions about specific interest rates, please contact Emily directly because every situation is very different. And depending on your credit score and situation, your interest rate could look very differently. So we're not going to talk about specific rates today.
So to understand what's going on with interest rates right now, I think it's more important to look at where we have been. So we had a really low rate environment for the last couple of years, starting around the time that COVID started. And so to talk about right now, I think we need to talk about a little bit more on what's been happening historically. So I think a lot of people may not know why rates went so low right around COVID.
Why did they go low?
COVID doesn't necessarily equal low interest rates, right? So what actually happened is related to the Fed. So Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve started in March, right around COVID started, dumping billions of dollars, that's billions with a B, into the mortgage bond market. They were essentially buying the interest rates down as what I would almost describe as like a back-end stimulus package. So we know about the stimulus packages that potentially happened during COVID where people were being sent payments and that kind of thing. But also what was happening was the Fed was buying interest rates low to help stimulate the economy. So low interest rates means people borrow money, people inject that money into the economy and keep it going even when other businesses are closing. And lots of other things happened that negatively impacted the economy at the same time. So the mortgage bond market had this huge injection of cash, around $40 billion a month being dumped into mortgage bonds. So
people use that money.
It's a lot of money. It's a whole lot of money. And it's actually what has now contributed to this state of potential inflation, which is something that, is a concern for everyone at this time. And so one of the ways that then the Federal Reserve hopes to manage inflation is by tapering their buying. So if you do any cursory Googling on interest rates or anything like that, the Fed, Jerome Powell, and their tapering announcements are a really big consideration in the overall bond market. And so they're basically saying, we're going to stop buying mortgage bonds, especially at the rate that they were while they were trying to manage what else was hurting our economy during COVID. So now they're starting to back that off. And as a result, hopefully manage inflation. But when they do, it causes the economy to have a lot less money injected in it, which can slow the economy. And so the plan by them, we think, is to manage inflation by slowing the economy, by reducing the amount of money being injected into the economy through ultra low interest rates. Thus, interest rates go up and hopefully they manage inflation.
And when we talk about where the interest rates are like right now, the last time they were like around that range was how many years ago?
I have a graph. Can I see
this graph?
Okay.
Yes.
So what this is the software I use to watch the bond market. There's a lot of different data that shows up on here, but what we're monitoring here is the value of one of the main mortgage-backed securities that ultimately drives interest rates. Okay. So this is a graph, and every time the graph goes up, it means the value of the mortgage-backed security is going up. It means the value's gone up, and it means interest rates go down. So if the graph is high, it means rates are low because the value of the mortgage bond is high. There's a lot of people invested in that mortgage bond, and it makes rates low. If lots of people are not invested in the mortgage bond, it means rates are going to be higher. Okay, so let's go look for a second at the last 5 days. Over the last 5 days, we've actually seen a little bit of an improvement over the last couple of days. Has not been so hot. We saw from Monday through today, we saw the value of the mortgage bond going up a little bit, and interest rates were actually a little bit better this week. And then you see that dip that's happened here today, right there, kind of toward the end of the page right here. this is where we're seeing rates a little bit down. But without context, this information is really hard to understand. So I think what would be helpful is to look back a little bit. So let's look back a month. Over the last month, generally speaking, the value of the mortgage bonds have been going down. You can see kind of a general trend downward. And as a result, interest rates have generally been trending up. Looking back a little further, let's look back 6 months. You can see where, man, mortgage rates were pretty stinking good for a long time. The value of that rate was really, really high. That meant interest rates were really low. And as you can see, we've seen kind of a pretty steady trend downward on the value of the bond, thereby bringing rates down a little bit. And then if we really start to look back though, I think to answer your question, when was the last time rates were so low? This graph honestly is the most helpful indicator of that. So we're way over here right now, somewhere between 99.72 and 100.77. If you see on that graph, that's kind of where we are. If we look back to, let's say, the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, our graph was significantly lower. So right about here, we were even lower than we are right now. So the interest rate environment that we're in right now isn't all that far off from where we were.
Still lower than a few years ago.
Correct. So the question is how fast we go down. How much further down does this graph go?
Which means higher interest rates.
Correct. So the further down the graph you get, you're
So
good. The further down the graph goes, the more interest rates are expected to go up. And so, but if we look back historically, I think this graph goes back to about 2011. We're here, which is kind of right in the middle. But have we been lower? Yes. Have we been higher? Also, yes. So we're somewhere in the middle. And ultimately, the question is going to be back to our conversation about the Fed and what their role is in managing interest rates and potentially managing inflation as a result. It's going to be more of a question of if rates continue to go up, how quickly. And so I had mentioned to you once the idea of stagflation. Stagflation is obviously close in name to inflation. And basically what it means is the concern that if the Fed increases rates a little too slowly and the other markets have enough time to kind of respond to it, it can create an economic situation where the economy just kind of stagnates and the inflation continues to rise. But the alternative would be that the Fed increases rates too sharply and creates a recession. And so the other alternative is that neither of those things happen and they do manage to kind of find that really good balance where they're increasing rates, hopefully softening the economy enough to manage the inflation without creating any other negative environment for the economy.
Makes sense. So it's like a fine balance.
It is. And so our hope is that rates may continue to rise a little bit, but the answer to that is basically a higher rate environment, or even the environment that we're in right now, is actually a lot more normal than the rate environment that we were in for the last 2 years. Really, the rate environment of the last 2 years, since about March of 2020, was kind of a fabricated environment where the Fed was really buying the market down when it otherwise wouldn't have been.
I can say that a few years ago, the interest rates that we were receiving up until recently were like that of what rumors were about, and nobody actually ever received those interest rates. And then all of a sudden they became like the normal, where almost everybody was receiving them. And now we're kind of back into what is standard. Mm-hmm. And even back when I bought my first house in 2007, they were still way higher than what people are paying now if they have good credit. So everything's all relative.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that's why, like, we could pull any kind of graph and we could say, oh, over the last week, wow, things are so much better. And then we look at 6 months and we're like, oh my gosh, that's so much worse. And then we look like way back and we're like, okay, we can see where we are in the grand scheme of where we've been, at least since we've been tracking it on this particular software. But as we start to look back, we can kind of start to orient ourselves in the larger picture of where the markets are. And so really the question, which none of us have an answer to, or we'd be billionaires, is where's it going? And we don't know that for sure. Yeah. But I do know that I think that there's still a really good opportunity to take advantage of interest rates that are still, in the grand scheme of things, well inside of what I would consider to be a normal market for the mortgage bonds. So,
and I'll tell you from like a realtor's perspective, the market is brutal right now, but sometimes all it takes is being the first one in the door. When you submit an offer, so like the second that you look at a house, don't wait 3 hours to submit that offer. Submit an offer immediately. Use a local lender like Emily with Stockman, because sometimes those larger, more national brands, they can't move as quickly. If you have an issue with an appraisal or with getting processing done, you can't show up in their office and choose not to leave until they do what you want. I've never had to do that with them. And they can react more quickly because it's their market. They know exactly what's going on and what's normal. So I have to say that's nice. And they also, many of them use local appraisers. Some of these large banks, they use appraisers that are not from this market sometimes, and you can see some really ugly appraisal issues because they don't know that our market has been appreciating a great deal. And I can tell you from what I've seen, appraisers use any numbers from 6% to 20% in appreciation. So it just depends on who you get on that aspect. But if you have any questions about financing a property, reach out to Emily. She's happy to give you the lowdown on how to potentially win in this market. And of course, reach out to me as well, because we can put together a game plan so that you don't have to sell your firstborn or your soul. So do you have any other input?
No, honestly, I think that I've been really lucky to work with Tamara. You know, I called her the other day and I was like, it's so hard to get offers accepted. And Tamara was like, oh, I think we've been really lucky. And I think luck doesn't necessarily have something to do with it. Sometimes you need a really good strategist. So just a quick plug for Tamara as well.
I like plugs. Thanks, team. Well, thank you all so much. And if you have any questions, you can reach me at 406-223-6823 or Emily at.
My cell phone is 406-551-0030.
She didn't give you an 800 number.
No, I did not.
Have a good day, guys.